Are you all not in Roorkee?
Not that cold now. The weather has become more pleasant.
As I speak, it's snowing heavily outside my window.
Oh, really? Acha, okay. You are in Boston, huh?
Yeah, I'm in Boston. That's what it's looking like.
Wow, wow. Oh, you are looks like skiing.
Yes. It's about, I think, 6 or 8 inches of snow today.
Okay, okay. Very difficult to go out.
Yes. It's difficult to go out and difficult to wake up in the morning.
Thank you for doing that for
No, no,
us.
no, 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 no. I don't mean it in the context of this lecture. The lecture is an absolute pleasure, but it's very cold. It's like minus 20 degrees. So,
Oh,
oof.
okay, okay, okay. Minus 20. Oh, this is unimaginable. But inside your apartment and office, you must be 20 degrees or something.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the heat is just coming on. So right now it is about 16. I think in a few minutes, it'll go up to 20. That's why I'm all sweatered up.
So you divide your time between Mumbai and Boston?
Yes, I do. Except, actually, as I say to my friends, this is the first time in my life that I've missed the mango season and the monsoon in Bombay, because I've been stuck here now for 10 or I think it was yesterday was 18th. Yeah, yesterday made it 1 year since I visited India.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, I mean, the problem is that for me to come to India would mean going to building sites and, all that. If I had to come to India and work from home virtually, I might as well sit here and work. That's what has been happening.
Yeah.
Because even my office in Mumbai, the space, we've closed it down now for 9, 10 months. So we're just all working virtually. So it means long hours, staying up late, getting up early. But it's probably better to just stay here and work virtually.
Right, right, right. So your teaching responsibilities are there in Harvard?
Yeah, I teach a pretty much full load. I teach 2 courses in the year and I teach 1 studio in the year. So I do 3 courses. So it's 8 credits for the studio and 4 credits for the classes. So I do 16 credit load every year.
And what is the kind of class strength?
It varies. One class I both the classes I do are about 70 people, 70 students, and the studio is actually the core studio for urban design. So we have 48 students, and we have 4 of us who teach. So we have about 12 students under us each. The typical studio load.
Okay, okay. And where was your education done?
Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad. Okay, okay. Gaurav, can we get started?
Yes, sir. So we were just waiting for architect Sanjay Kanvinde to join. We received from his office that he's joining.
Okay.
I think we'll wait just for 1 or 2 minutes and then we'll kick off.
And Gaurav, as I told you, 9:25 for me AM is a hard stop because I got to teach at 9:30. So
Yes, sir, yes, sir. So does it translate fine if we stop at 8 here?
yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Yes, yes.
I think it would end before that, unless there is a heavy barrage of questions.
Yeah, but what you could do is you could distill it to a few questions, and
Yeah.
and I'm happy if there's some students who want to write later on to me. I'm happy to carry on the conversation. I had no flexibility with the teaching. I don't know why I had accidentally entered this for tomorrow morning in my calendar, so I had no stress because I thought it's a Saturday. Then luckily you sent me that email and it woke me up.
Sorry, sir. I somehow
No, it's my
this
mistake. It's my
intuition.
mistake. No, what happens is between the time difference, no, it'll be evening India, morning me, 18th, 19th. It's always have to be very careful about this.
True. Actually, we were earlier fixing this talk in November, but then,
Yes.
our sessions were getting over. So we
Yeah.
were wondering whether our students would be able to, receive it in, good enthusiasm or not. And then we had this, placement season. So we wanted to begin our semester with your talk.
Yeah.
Hopefully it brings a lot of springing energy and enthusiasm amongst all of
Well,
us.
I hope so. I hope
No,
so.
so we are absolutely looking forward, and coincidentally, we know you've authored so much on the Kumbh, and this is the year we are also having Kumbh 30
Yes.
kilometers away from us.
Yes.
We wish there could be a parallel study for Haridwar as well.
Yeah. I'm not speaking too much on the Kumbh. That's a whole
Right.
uh, lecture in itself, but happy at some point to come and do it for you.
Sure, sure, sure. I think we look forward to have you here in person.
No, this has been very much my dream to come to Roorkee. I can't believe I haven't been to Roorkee. So,
And so if I may say, it is not really recorded much, but when architect Charles Correa was conferred the honoris causa doctorate from IIT Roorkee, I recollect his words. He mentioned that the aqueduct that we have, which became the reason for the existence of our campus, he said that this is no less a national wonder than Taj Mahal. These were his words. But they
yeah.
remain stored in some email and therefore not coined anywhere
Yeah.
else. So we would
But
wish to definitely connect with heritage and
yeah,
conservation.
he spoke a lot. He enjoyed that visit very much and spoke about it often.
So,
I
so I
think
think,
Sanjay is here.
yeah. I think Sanjay sir has joined. So I think we can then start. So I hope I'm
Hi
audible.
Rahul, hi Gaurav.
Yeah, hello, good evening, sir. Very warm welcome.
Yeah,
And we'll request, you can come live. That's really a great pleasure.
Hey, hi, Sanjay.
hi, good to see you, Rahul.
Likewise, I can see Tanuja is with you too.
Well, she's not here right now, but uh, somewhere in the office.
Okay,
This is early for you.
very early. Yes.
Right. So I think we'll get started. May I request Professor Chani to come live if he can. So a very warm good evening, friends. A very warm welcome from India to all those who are joining us from other parts of the world as well. A very warm welcome to this moment, actually, that this day brings us together, to initiate the Sir A.P. Kanvinde Memorial Lecture Series here at the Department of Architecture and Planning, IIT Roorkee, in the memory and honor of Padma Shri late architect Shri A.P. Kanvinde sir. So it is indeed an honor and privilege for us to welcome architect Rahul Mirotra here from Harvard University for his inaugural talk on architecture in context to begin this entire series. It is equally an honor for us to welcome architect Sanjay Kanvinde sir to briefly share his reflections on the works and philosophy of architect A.P. Kanvinde sir, who also happens to be his own father. I also extend a very warm welcome to Professor Ajit Chaturvedi, our Honorable Director, Professor Manoranjan Parida, in case he is joined as our Deputy Director, and our own Head of the Department, Professor P.S. Chani, who's been greatly instrumental in pushing us to get this series started. Also, very warmly welcome my faculty colleagues, young students from the department, institute, and many other friends and scholars from all around the world who I am sure are very keenly looking forward for this talk as I hear from the social media conversations. Friends, it's a very, very humbling moment for me today to initiate this virtual talk that intertwines humility and honor with grace and magnanimity. One, in laying the foundation for a lecture series like this, in the name of a man, Mr. A.P. Kanvinde, who himself was a humble master and to whom we very fondly remember as the father of modern Indian architecture. In brief, a man who gave much of the modern context to the post-independent India. And second, in having a visionary scholar like architect Rahul Mirotra, who shapes the thoughts and the minds of the young future. Architect Kanvinde not only shaped the institutions of science and technology in the post-independent India, but he also shaped the language of space and materiality, which continues to inspire the context of architecture today and the quest for timelessness in the future. I believe architect Kanvinde had a very special relationship with IIT Roorkee and the then erstwhile University of Roorkee, who gave shape and roof to our civil and mechanical engineering departments, Khosla International House, the then Afro-Asian Hostel, Ganga Bhavan, and our Saharanpur campus, which happened to be at one time the pulp and paper technology unit of our institution, along with the Central Building Research Institute at Roorkee. His architecture gave the nation a context from Physical Research Laboratory at Ahmedabad to IIT Kanpur, from National Science Center at New Delhi to the Doodh Sagar Dairy in Anand. He gave us the language of content and context through architecture that responds to the needs and function, climate and form, society and technology in harmonious and yet creative ways. As we remain indebted to architect Kanvinde, we remind ourselves today in his memory and reflect further through his ideas and principles, practices and philosophies. This discourse on architecture for the youth and the scholars of the future today. Architecture in context, as we are all going to deal with today, would perhaps be the best suited timeless tribute on which today we join with architect Rahul Mirotra. These words, I welcome all the panelists on the dais here today, and I request now Professor Chani to share his words of welcome.
Good evening, all of you. Good evening, Architect Rahul Mirotra, for taking out of your valuable time to be with us this evening. Good evening, Sanjay, for being with us and sharing your memories of your father and his work with us. And good evening, Professor Chaturvedi, for helping us in such a wonderful way that so many initiatives are possible now within the IIT. And all our students who have joined us today. And of course, a very, really my expression of gratitude to Gaurav for all the hard legwork that he has done in making this possible. I remember when this department and node series was initiated in IIT, and we as a department were looking for a name. The one name that really came in front of us as a committee also was an architect who has done a tremendous amount of work in modernism in India, an architect who's played a major role in doing that, and an architect who simultaneously was also associated with IIT Roorkee and is close to our heart. And the only name that came in front of us was that of AP Kanvinde. So there was not a shadow of doubt when we called it the AP Kanvinde Memorial Series. And it's been like that since then. And unfortunately, the pandemic delayed, put some water on our enthusiasm, and it's been delayed. But now it's getting initiated. And what an initiation, having Rahul Mirotra come talk to us and talk to us about some of the issues that are prevailing in global architecture, in the Indian context, in the global context, all those varying issues, and to lay them in front of us. We've heard him talk at many forums across the world, but today we get an opportunity to hear from him as personally as this audience. You all know that this department was established in 1956. We have currently an undergraduate program in architecture, master's programs in architecture as well as in planning. And there are several top of the line labs that are now working and taking architecture into areas of quantitative research in inclusive design, climatology, net zero energy, built environment, energy efficiency, infrastructural planning in many areas, with the focus being that this being an IIT, the strength being that and the buildings of tomorrow being so tremendously complex as they are, our department will stand at a point where we can train students who will have that strong quantitative initiative in their work. But then I leave it here and I leave it to Mr. Rahul Mirotra to come forth and share his perspective about where architecture stands today. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining and making this occasion such a joy and a pleasure for all of us, and truly an honor for our department. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chani. It's now my duty and honor to request Professor Chaturvedi, our director, to share his words of wisdom with the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav. I think it's a day that I was waiting for quite some time. I'm happy that finally this day has come. This initiative in every department was taken so that we can honor an icon of University of Roorkee or else a national icon, and use that platform to get the stalwarts like architect Rahul Mirotra to come to the campus. But COVID being COVID, we could not bring architect Rahul Mirotra to the campus. But I am happy that this online thing is happening. But we will wait for his visit as soon as things become normal, so that he can come to the campus and actually see whatever work is happening here. And it's a double honor for me that the series has been, double pleasure for me that the series has been named after somebody whose name I've been hearing for the last 4 decades. And that is architect Kanvinde. Ever since I was a student at IIT Kanpur and then as a faculty and then holding positions of responsibility, when Mr. Sanjay used to visit the campus and we used to discuss how to ensure continuity of the original idea of IIT Kanpur and at the same time bring in modern architecture. And he was instrumental in trying to do that. So if the lecture series is named after architect Kanvinde, I think it's really a pleasure. And the kind of work that he has done, he is really a national icon. So I also look forward to hearing to Mr. Sanjay Kanvinde and to architect Mirotra. So over to you, Gaurav. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So with these words, I would now invite architect Sanjay Kanvinde with a few words in his honor, who is an architect and an urban designer by training, and presently a senior, in fact, leader for the firm Kanvinde, Rai and Chaudhary, who has an experience of almost 40 years in the field of architecture and who has himself been a graduate of School of Planning and Architecture and a postgraduate in urban design from Rice University, Houston. We would be very much honored to hear architect Sanjay Kanvinde to reflect very briefly on, we know Mr. Kanvinde, AP Kanvinde is an institution by himself. To talk about him in few minutes is just next to impossible. What it is like sharing a first glimpse of his tributes, we would invite few words from architect Sanjay Kanvinde. And sir, if you would like to share a presentation, I would be able to make you a presenter.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gaurav, for those kind words. I'll just share this presentation. It's going to be a very brief one because, as you know, time is extremely short, and I think it won't keep you from Rahul's lecture, which is actually more important. How do I share this? I'll just run through a few slides, which just gives a range of the kind of work that Mr. Kanvinde was involved with. How do I show this? Let's go here. Let's start with a quote of Mr. Kanvinde's. Though schooled at the JJ school in Bombay, he really changed when he first got exposed to Gropius in the US. And that basically altered his whole life and his attitude. This is just a range of work starting from Atira in the 50s, right down to his last works, which included the ISKCON temple in New Delhi. I will just concentrate on just one project right now, which is really the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, because a lot of students may be interested actually in the. So here, as you probably are aware, there is a system of linking the buildings by a structural skeleton, which is the framework of buildings, the muscles, which are the ordered sequence of link spaces, and the circulation system, which is the pedestrian ways. And of course, there's a peripheral vehicular system. So if you see my cursor, you know, the faculty building is somewhere here, the library is there, the lecture halls are here, the western, the southern, and the eastern labs are somewhere there, and they're all linked by a covered walkway system, which enables somebody to move both at the ground floor as well as the first floor level, which accesses the various buildings, which was a different concept to the earlier IITs which were happening, and perhaps other institutes also. These are just a few images of you know, the principal buildings, the lecture hall complex, the faculty building, and the library, as well as the southern labs. Then I'll just and the computer center. Sorry. I will just now briefly move on to the projects that he was involved with at Roorkee, starting with the CBRI, which is contiguous with the IIT Roorkee campus, but just outside. These are based on some archival images that we have, perspective done by him for the CBRI campus, and a few images. Also the civil engineering department, the mechanical engineering department, which were also done, and the Khosla International, which was earlier known as the Afro-Asian Hostel. And he was also involved, coincidentally, with one of the earliest hostels, which is probably, which in our records was shown as the Overseer Hostel, but subsequently is probably either the Rajendra Bhavan or could be the Ganga Bhavan. One is not too sure about this thing because his imprint seems to be there, but you know, the plan seems to be showing up on the Google map of you know, the campus. I will end with a quote by him: "My buildings are my best memory. No other memory is required." With that, I'll leave it to Rahul to kind of open the whole thing, because I'm sure people are looking forward to his lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanjay sir. I think the last quote really makes us speechless while we have to open the doors at this point. So doing a little bit of technical bit here, I will now be making Rahul sir the presenter so that he can share his thing while I introduce him in the parallel, right? Yeah. So once again, friends, it's my august duty to introduce the speaker of the day, architect Rahul Mirotra. I know no amount of words can complete his introduction, but to be brief on this point, I would briefly read out from what I received from him as his bio sketch. So Rahul Mirotra is the founder principal of RMA Architects. He divides his time between working in Mumbai and Boston and teaching at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University, where he's a professor of urban design and planning and the John T. Dunlop Professor in Housing and Urbanization. His Mumbai-based firm RMA Architects was founded in 1990, and he has designed several diverse scale of projects, which includes like software campus of the Hewlett-Packard in Bangalore, a campus for Magic Bus, which is an NGO which works for poor children, and he led the restoration of the Chowmahalla Palace in Hyderabad and formulated a conservation master plan for the Taj Mahal with the Taj Mahal Collaboration Conservative Collaborative. His firm has also recently designed and built a social housing project, very interestingly, for 100 elephants and their caretakers in Jaipur, as well as the corporate office in Hyderabad. He has developed several designs for single family houses in various parts of India and one in Karachi in Pakistan as well. In 2015, the RMA architects completed the Lab of the Future on the Novartis campus in Basel in Switzerland, and they were the finalists in the International Design Competition for the Museum of Modern Art in Sydney. The recent projects of the firms include library at the School of Architecture at CEPT, Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Ahmedabad University, School of Public Policy at IIM Ahmedabad, and several others. Noteworthy to mention here is in 2018, the RMA architects were awarded the Venice Biennale Jurors Special Mention for these three projects that addresses the issues of intimacy and empathy, gently diffusing social boundaries and hierarchies. Mirotra has written and lectured extensively on issues to do with architecture, conservation, and urban planning and design in Mumbai and India. His writings include co-authoring Bombay, The Cities Within, which covers the city's urban history from the 1600s to the 1990s. There are several other books which I'm sure we will get a mention of, and I can circulate it with everyone else also. But since 2014, Rahul Mirotra has been a member of the CICA, which is the International Committee of Architecture Critics. He's a member of the steering committee of the Lakshmi Mittal South Asia Institute at Harvard. And in 2012 to 2015, he led a Harvard University-wide research project with Professor Diana Ek called the Kumbh Mela, Mapping the Ephemeral Megacity. This work was published as a book in 2014, and his research got extended in 2017 in the form of a book titled Does Permanence Matter? This research was also extended into an invited exhibition in the 2016 Venice Biennale. And Mirotra co-authored this book titled Taj Mahal with Multiple Narratives, which was published in 2017. And his most recent book is titled Working in Mumbai 2020, and is a reflection of his practice evolved through its association with the city of Mumbai, that is where it stands. Now, before I hand over to Rahul sir with such an meticulous, I would say, range of projects and exposure, the only quote that I'm remembering is from Kevin Marklow, who's also a young architect in Malaysia, whose book writes that creativity is a conversation between context and reality. So I believe that his creativity is a response to the context, which we all know in the form of language that he writes and authors in the books. One of them, which I remember, is the contemporary Indian architecture as well. So with that, over to Rahul sir. Very excitedly and passionately, we look forward to hearing you, sir. And the floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav. You can see my slide and hear me clear?
Yeah, we can, sir.
Thank you. So Gaurav, thank you very much. This has really been a tremendous effort to coordinate everything, and I really appreciate your patience, support in making all this happen, and to Professor Chaturvedi and Professor Chani for all your kind words, but also for, situating the department where it is and starting a series like this. It's a real honor for me to be doing this, and absolutely very moving actually. And I'm so happy that Sanjay spoke. And Sanjay, thank you for your beautiful words. I think you picked very carefully what you showed. it was very beautiful. In fact, I was just moved by seeing all those slides in a tremendously beautiful way. So thank you for that introduction. And I I in the last few days, just in preparing for this lecture, but in a sense, it's not many new things I might show you, but the fact that it was a lecture I was doing in the memory of AP Kanvinde made me just keep that book, Sanjay and Tanuja, that you've put together, which is so beautiful. I bought it the moment it came out, but as in many books that we have, you look at it, but you never immerse yourself in things till there's a reason to. And this was a perfect reason for me to immerse myself completely in that book. And I realized how beautiful a capture of the archive it is. You have everything ranging from Mr. Kanvinde's words, first person words, to many other commentaries on his work, which is tremendously beautiful. I'm so glad. And I know this for a fact, and I think you mentioned it in your acknowledgement, that Charles Correa pushed you to do the book, almost beckoned you to do the book, almost threatened that you must do the book, which is, I think, a nice connection. I personally did not know Mr. Kanvinde well, but I did meet him once, and it was a very strange meeting. I was a student in 1982, or I think 3, maybe 2, I think. I was doing my thesis with Professor Anand Rajay, and I was doing my thesis, my undergraduate thesis, on Claude Batley's work. And I had, in my research, come across Mr. Kanvinde's sketches, at the JJ School of Art under Claude Batley. And after many letters and actually finally landing up in Delhi and landing up at the office and managing to convince the partners first that I really needed to meet Mr. Kanvinde. I was all of 21 years old. I finally got an audience with him, which lasted about, I think, 7 minutes. I very enthusiastically spoke about my work on Batley and why I was interested in Batley. And there were very good reasons I was interested in Batley, and I'm yet very inspired and interested in Batley. And he listened to me very patiently for 5 minutes and really then dismissed me in a nice way, in a very gentle way, but a very firm way, and said that that was all rubbish. And what he really learned was what he learned at Harvard and with Gropius. And I was actually stunned into silence because I really, as a 21-year-old, didn't know how to respond to a comment like that. But anyway, I finished my thesis. I myself went to Harvard to study. And then I began to realize what he was saying. And that's why I've got this picture up here, which is literally a 5-minute as the crow flies from where I'm sitting and I'm speaking. And this is a photograph of Mr. Kanvinde in 1947, standing at the Charles River on the Harvard campus. This is a bridge I cross every day because I live on the other side and I go to work, before the pandemic. So when I saw this image, I just thought it would be a good motive for me to start with. And so I think, and many years later coming back, and actually 3 years ago, after 20 years going back to Atira, I realized he was truly the first modernist, as your first slide showed, Sanjay, and the connection with Gropius. And all of that, of course, became much more evident for me. And for me to now go back and study here, I just wanted to share these two intersections that I've had with Mr. Kanvinde, one in person for 7 minutes through Batley, and the other now through Gropius, being also someone now who teaches here at Harvard. So it's really very moving and very important. And this is, I think, a moment I will remember for a long time, that one had the honor to open this inaugural, to open the series with this inaugural lecture. So thank you all again very much for this honor of being able to, do this lecture. So in my discussions, we decided that let's talk about architecture and context, at least as a framing of how we talk about architecture in India. And what I'm going to share with you is a 2-part lecture where I'm going to share with you first just my observations of what I see around me and what you might think might influence the way one thinks about architecture, and then share a few projects. And we'll go through some of them quickly because many of them are a lecture in themselves, but I want to, I think, pick up on what Gaurav said, which is just expose you to the different ways that we can actually respond to it. Now, I mean, I think I use this image. It's from National Geographic. It's not my image, but it's a really moving image because it tells you about the everyday life we experience, at least in our big cities. And this sort of disparity, we begin to take a blasé attitude towards it, but this is something actually we have to sensitize ourselves to, because architecture, actually, I believe, sometimes is the problem and not the solution. And architecture can divide while it should connect. And I think this agency of architecture we have to be really mindful of. This is an image I will come back to later. It's one of our projects, but I want to start by quoting Martha Chen, who is also a professor at the Kennedy School of Government. She is probably the world's authority on the informal economy, and writing about the informal economy, I read something she wrote which struck me, and I think we can find parallels for it in architecture. And Martha Chen said that in the context of the economy she was speaking, but translated into architecture and cities, what is needed most fundamentally is a new economic paradigm, a model of a hybrid economy that embraces the traditional and the modern, the small scale and the big scale, the informal and the formal. What is needed is an economic model that allows the smallest units in society and the least powerful workers to operate alongside the largest units and the most powerful economic players. And if you translate that into imagery of cities and architecture, it really does resonate very, very deeply. And I think we have to be mindful of it. So when we come to the context, what do we mean? And I think we are not ambitious enough when we define what context means. So, I mean, I think context, as we are taught, are actually often tangibles. We talk about the climate, the soil condition, the materials available locally. Perhaps we get a little more ambitious and get sensitive to the lifestyle of people, the cultures that are going to occupy the built environment that we are going to create. It begins to start moving into that intangibles. And it also, if some of us are more ambitious, we kind of excavate the embedded histories on a site, and we can create narratives around it, which actually inspire what we finally do. But that's yet not enough, because really to understand the context, we have to place it in its context. We have to nestle the context in its context. So the question then becomes is, what is the context of the context? Because the context is not enough. The context in the way we are trained as architects is not enough. We have to intersect that understanding of the context with much broader socio-political, cultural, religious intersections and forces that surround us, because that's what informs what our context means. And we can't take ourselves away from that challenge. We might not always hit it bang on, we might not always even understand it, but we have to attempt it. And this becomes very critical. And so really what I'm saying is, I think we need to expand this much more. So for example, even if you take the question of climate change, that is the context of our context. When we talk about building on a site, if we're not thinking climate change and we're not anticipating climate change, we are not addressing the issue of the context. And I think this is a challenge that we must collectively as a profession put out there for ourselves. We organize the world through very clean binaries. It's a very good way to organize the world around us. We set many, you can keep going with these binaries, but really design is about really dissolving these binaries. Design is about trying to create a place where both aspects of this binary can coexist in harmony. Design is about synthesis, right? Design just intrinsically as an act is about synthesizing, where we take many forces. Even when you design a product, you take the forces that act on it, all the way from the economic and the market forces to the aspirational forces, and you resolve it in an object. And architecture is a much more complex manifestation of the resolution of those forces spatially, correct? And so it is always about the dissolution of binaries, not the strengthening and the hardening of these binaries, of how we can dissolve them in a synthetic way. And so when this binary thinking lands on the ground, that's what we see, and we very neatly make it the formal and the informal city, right? For example. But what's interesting is that's an aesthetic judgment, because really it has nothing to do with, say, economy. So I would argue that many people living in what we call the informal city are partaking in the formal economy. They work in government offices, they work in offices, they are paid by check, their money goes in a bank through a direct deposit. And I can argue that many people living in what you're calling the formal city are actually involved in the informal economy. We talk about the black economy, talk about cash money, talk about, so there is no clear correlation. There's already a dissolution there, while as architects, we are reinforcing the binary. Our cities on the ground are quite different. They work on a temporal scale. I call it the kinetic city. I don't call it the formal or the informal city. I call it the kinetic city. Its logic is different. Its logic is about elasticity. Its logic is about appropriation and deappropriation and reappropriation of space. Its logic is about incrementalism, small moves. It is not about grand vision. It's about grand adjustment. And these are the 5 stages of squatting that usually make our cities. This is the logic of our cities. I'm not saying cities should be only made like this, but this is the inherent logic. This guy's in the 3rd stage of squatting. Or the way we use public space, this beautiful Indian game that the British invented called cricket. In Mumbai on the Maidans, the cricketers engage with this space, but in the evenings it becomes a venue for weddings, where a wedding wraps around, and you see the cricket pitch is the only sacred space. There are implicit rules here of negotiation, where space is appropriated, but it's then deappropriated and goes back to cricket in the morning. Or a street, which during the Ganesh festival gets appropriated as a community center, and it lasts for 10 days and is deappropriated and reappropriated by the community. Or even the spectacle itself of the Ganesh Chaturthi immersions is it's an amazing spectacle, where here in the city, architecture is not the sole spectacle of the city, but festivals like this. And on the last day, through immersion, when the clay idol dissolves in the water, the spectacle comes to a close. It's an enacted moment. It's an enacted process. It leaves no memory, as opposed to architecture, which encodes memory. There's a temporality here. This is ephemeral. It's reversible, and it's quite wonderful. But it works with architecture as a backdrop. So there's a synergy, there's a synthetic dissolution here of the binaries, where both these spectacles, actually, one which is an enacted process and one which is a codification in architecture, both actually operate and collapse together. This is quite different from cities where architecture is the sole spectacle of the city. And for me, places like Dubai, Shanghai, these are what I would call cities of impatient capital. And this is the architecture of impatient capital, where it's capital which is intrinsically impatient, that needs to realize its value very quickly. And the terrains and the territories that create these frictionless moments for capital to land and to realize itself very quickly, to realize its value very quickly, creates this brittle form of the architecture of impatient capital. And that has implications which are manifold, which I can't even go into. But one of the big shifts is the question of weathering. And we've moved our debates from weathering, which is what we do, and a lot of us yet do in India, where we use natural materials, we use resources that are local, and we design the buildings to age and weather, versus weatherproofing, weathering versus weatherproofing. And here weatherproofing is about sealants, it's about double glazing, it's about shiny objects that never look like they age, right? And so this is a very big shift that's occurring in architecture globally, which we have to be cognizant about, because really the weather is part of our context. The weather is the landscape. The weather is the visual, the quality of the light. And here the monsoon, for example, when these clouds roll into the sky in a place like Mumbai, they are very threatening, because you're imagining flood, you're imagining devastation, but you're also imagining optimism, water, you're imagining a dry and a hot summer disappearing and dissipating. And so this sort of relationship that we have with climate and how architecture engages in the notion of weathering is very important and beautiful, and how one can actually design and celebrate these moments become very critical. So these are, these are some aspects of concern, and I can keep going on. the question really becomes, and I think for the young generation of architects, this becomes even more critical. The question becomes, how do you make this intersection between your sphere of concern and your sphere of influence, right? I mean, we are concerned with many issues. We're concerned with climate change. We're concerned with poverty and inequity and social justice. We're concerned with, I mean, a million things. And we often spend evenings, we can spend evenings like this talking about our concerns, and we get up the next morning to go to office to work, and we realize our sphere of influence is very limited because we are adding to someone's house, or we are doing something that doesn't even concern society more broadly. And so therefore the question really, and the challenge, in the same way as we talk about the context and nestling the context in its context, we must also think about how we can actually expand and become even more ambitious about our concerns, and articulate those concerns, and articulate the concerns in a way that they speak the language of spatial implications, perhaps, but also build our sphere of influence simultaneously, of how we engage with society, how we engage as practitioners. And for me here, at least in my own practice, books have been, as research projects, have been very important. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I actually, 2 weeks ago, I did a full lecture for an hour for the Council of Architects, just on the books that you see on the screen, and talking about what each one of those books meant in terms of our practice. And you'll find it on YouTube, so anyone interested, please look at it. But it is a very integral part of our practice. And I don't even pretend they're scholarly books. I don't even call them academic books. For me, these are what I call instruments of advocacy. These are instruments by which advocacy can happen. And sometimes you're not the advocate, but I think we are all trained to create these instruments of advocacy, because unless we begin to articulate the meaning and the implication of the environment that we occupy, that the environment that we make, the environment that we implicate society in engaging with, I think we don't do our duty. And so therefore, to capture this in ways that somebody else, another advocate, can use it as an instrument to advocate for something, I think becomes important. And this advocacy, at least in my own practice, has ranged at different levels. So for example, I've just sort of arranged some of these. There was a whole lot of work we did, and I did with Sharda Devedi, my friend who passed away a few years ago, but we got involved in many aspects of the city and writing about it, all the way from doing walking tours to create awareness about buildings, to taking a building like just the Victoria Terminus and creating a catalog of archival drawings and how the building was imagined so that it might sensitize people who restore it, to popularizing Art Deco, to also doing a document which was really a instrument of advocacy to get legislation into Mumbai, and it was successful in the way it was sort of compiled, to other books which I've compiled at the bottom, which have to do much more with urbanism. And again, I think Gaurav alluded to the Kumbh Mela, which resulted in this book called Ephemeral Urbanism. And here the whole idea was to challenge the debate about urban design, which premises architecture as the central protagonist. And how does one get away from that? Because architecture, like I said, sometimes is the problem, it's not the solution. So it was a way to infect the discussion about urban design more globally with this kind of research to open up other kinds of possibilities. And many of these result in things, many of these will result in things over generations, one doesn't know. Books are these objects you put out in the world, and they have their own life, and they go beyond you, which is the beauty of sharing knowledge. And for me, that is sort of very important in the practice. And like I said, this collection of books on Mumbai, which ranged from discussing conservation to discussing the railway system in Mumbai, resulted in conservation, it resulted in the legislation, it resulted in us getting involved with the Fort District, it resulted in instituting the Kala Ghoda festival, it also resulted in then fixing buildings in that area, initiating projects to conserve the district, to take specific buildings like the Prince of Wales Museum, and here make an intervention which opens up 50,000 square feet feet of gallery space, which was otherwise a warehouse, but how one can also do that in a kind of contemporary way, in a way where the canons of conservation, here you see the new structure is 6 inches away from the old structure, so it's reversible, so another generation can actually remove it if they disagree with the proposition. So you leave things open-ended. So time then becomes a very important aspect of the imagination of architecture. And then we've continued to work with them to add a visitor center. And these are projects that are sort of self-initiated. These are projects that don't exist. But because one engages in the broader context, in this case, we were looking at the notion of the art district, spatial possibilities become evident. And therefore, one then plays the role in society of imagining with constituencies, in this case, the owners of or the people in charge of the Prince of Wales Museum or the Shivaji Chhatrapati Sangrahalaya now, to look at ways that you could actually, as an architect, spatially improve their campus. So here we created a visitor center, which became an entrance gateway and incorporated all the needs for security and orientation and interpretation. But it was a very low-key building that wrapped around the various trees there. It was built in new materials. It was built in a way that it could be actually dismantled in 48 hours. So it's a reversible kind of object, even though it provokes the difference in terms of the contemporary versus the more traditional, or in this case, a kind of heritage building. So this then, of course, led us also to an interest in documenting and writing about architecture. And the first book that I kind of worked on architecture was with Kenneth Frampton, who is a professor at Columbia and a well-known architectural critic. And we did this book in the 90s, in the late 90s, to celebrate, the century of architecture. And we looked at South Asia. That led me to get interested in writing about this, which led to what Gaurav was referring to, was architecture in India. And in architecture in India, of course, there were many things, but I think the primary thing that I took away from the architecture in India was the notion that actually many models of engagement and many models of practice actually exist simultaneously. We don't realize it, but we find ourselves sitting in one of these many forms of practice. Many of us actually go across these different forms of practice, and these forms of practice involve different protocols, different modes of instruction, different usage of material, different relationships to the context. The global practices are completely detached from their context. They could be anywhere and they can email drawings to a site and get it built. They could be sitting in New York and emailing drawings to Roorkee and not even feeling the site, right? Whereas the alternate practitioners and the counter-modernists are very much about the site. And so there's a kind of gradation here. And again, a lecture in itself, but the book speaks for itself, I hope. But these kinds of became the interests. And so it's not only about writing, but it's about extracting mindfully of what implications that might even have on practice. And of course, that led us to do an exhibition called The State of Architecture, which had wonderful, things that emerged from it, not only things about the writing of architecture, but, in this diagram that you see, what you see stacked up as these lines of data are the numbers of schools of architecture. And you see at Independence, we have 1 or 2 schools of architecture. By the 50s, with Roorkee and others, you have 5, 6, 7 schools of architecture. And now you have 420s or 30s, I don't know even. Every day there's a school of architecture. And what is interesting is what you see as a blue line going up here is the growth of real estate as an organized sector from the 1990s in India. And what you see is a rise of architecture schools in proportion to the rise of real estate as an industry. And actually, this is counterintuitive, but I would argue architecture schools and the demand for architects is inversely proportionate to the growth of real estate, not directly proportionate. Because once real estate gets organized as a sector and one developer does townships for 3,000 families, they actually have one in-house architect doing it. In the paradigm of low-rise, low-density, disaggregated development, that same project would have involved 500 architects. So we should be actually closing down schools of architecture, not opening schools of architecture, if I just took the parameter of real estate. And so that extended into another exhibition called The State of Housing, where we were really asking the question, why are architects not involved in housing? And why are we only involved in what I call the architecture of indulgence, which is for 1% of society, beautiful farmhouses, beautiful weekend homes, beautiful single family houses, boutiques and boutique hotels and galleries. And you know, we are far from actually engaged with 90% of our population. In any case, I think this gave me two insights, which I will now end this part of the lecture and jump into projects with, which is that one was that the protocols and processes in the making of architecture is critical. And depending on the context and its larger context, and depending on how you determine how you engage with the context in terms of the mode of practice, how you communicate instructions, are these emailed elaborate drawings, or are these like Laurie Baker instructions on site, talking to the craftsmen and befriending them and then becoming part of a camaraderie? What is the connection with the object that you're actually putting out in the world is very, very important. And in different projects, of course, that varies tremendously. But that determination of the protocols and processes by which these objects are made is very critical for us to be mindful of. The second thing that I learned from all of this was that what we take as the client is actually a very nuanced category. We take the client as the client, right? But actually every project has a patron client, it has an operational client, and it has a user client. These are very differentiated actually. In the case of a single family home or a weekend house or a house by definition, this collapses into one entity. And that's why those are so frictionless, and we do our best work when we're doing houses, correct? The brief is very clear. At the most, you might have a couple that fights, and so that's the only thing you have to resolve. But this entity collapses into a singular one. Your client actually becomes very clear. Let's take a government project or even a campus. You know, Mr. Kanvinde's IIT campus, for example, that Sanjay showed us. You know, in a campus, you have a campus architect, an engineer, or the CPWD that is going to construct the campus. So that's the operational client. You have the users, who are faculty and students, who have a completely different set of aspirations sometimes. And then you have the patron client, which might be the president of the university. It might be Nehru himself, who might have said that they would like a campus, you know, whoever the patron would have been. Often the connection between the patron client, the operational client, and the user client is very nebulous. They sometimes don't even talk to each other. Sometimes they're at loggerheads. It really becomes the architect who has to be very aware of this to bring their aspirations on the same plate, on the same level, on the same table for those negotiations. And so our role can get quite complex depending on the project we are involved with, depending on how we understand the context and its context, and also how we understand the client, and we negotiate what we feel for society would be the best, most efficient spatial possibilities. In fact, society invests in us to imagine better spatial possibilities in which society can live its lives. And so I think this becomes a huge responsibility. So now I'm going to just show you a few projects, and they might not match up with the aspirations I've put out, but I hope you enjoy seeing them, and we'll go through them quite quickly. It's really to give you more an overview rather than the detailed nuances. So Mumbai weekend homes, like we all start our practices, what I call the kitchen route. We renovate someone's kitchen, we add a room to someone's house, then we do a house, then we move to institutions. It's a very interesting scalar route, but weekend homes become one critical one for all of us who live in big cities. Most homes get built like this. I always tell the story. This contractor, when I asked him who the architect of the project was, I happened to meet him. And he said, no, I did it. And the client just gave me an image of the White House in Washington, and I copied it, right? So then we set out these huge objects of opulence in a rural landscape. And this creates, I think, the polarizing of the same binaries that I talked about, where sophisticated urban people build in rural landscapes and create these isolated silos which actually separates societies. Rural people from the village will come and work and clean your house and cook for you and go away. And so for us, this has been a very important thing in the houses we've done, where we've tried to dissipate this polarity, tried to create what I call softer thresholds. And this is a house we did for a young couple, and we convinced them and spoke to them and discussed it with them that, look, their living room they're going to always use as a veranda because they want to be in the teakwood woods that they located in. And so let's let the living room just be a veranda. It's very light furniture. When you go away after the weekend, you're hardly going to be there for 60 days in a year. You put the furniture away, and your caretaker, who is the local man from the village, can actually sit here with his daughter, teach her math, have friends, and have tea with them. And it becomes a space that he occupies. It'll be great for your security, but it will create the softening of this threshold. And you can see there are two taps there. Those taps, the roof all collects water, the water charges the well, and those taps are a generous offering to the local villagers that they can use the water when the people who own this house are not there. This doesn't mean if you have a social agenda like that, you don't articulate the project carefully. And of course, it's a plan which we spent hours and days and months on developing. The materials are local except for this GI sheet roof that you see, which is insulated so it doesn't get too hot, but it's a porous space which allows that space to have a dual coding where a different part of society can use it at different times while the people who own the house don't exist or don't occupy the house, sorry. Similarly, we did a house more recently for a very well-known doctor who actually discovered drug-resistant TB. And you see it's on the edge of a village. And we imagined and anticipated that this village, which was already growing right here, would soon sort of engulf even the house. And therefore, did you want this to be a mansion, a weekend mansion sitting in a village? No. So what we did was we actually disaggregated it and made it into many units so that it would have the scale of what would surround it eventually. But it was also a project as a provocation for ourselves, where we asked that if a middle-class person wanted a weekend house and they had to build it over 20 years as their income group, how would they do it? And so, one unit became the living dining kitchen. One unit became, I think, the unit, what I call the unit of indulgence, with a lap pool, with a study, with a guest room. And the other unit was the 3 bedrooms for the family. And they were connected. Now, you could have built either one of these rooms. You could have built them separately and gone from one to the other by going out. But we kind of connected it, which was the aspiration, again, of urban people going and occupying a rural landscape. But it could be a project that could incrementally grow. But the main thing was here breaking the scale down so that as the village grew around it, it didn't seem like a monster sitting there. And you approached it with this basin stone, with these disaggregated forms of the different rooms. And the only opulence was the copper around some of the important windows, which created nice reflections, but also marked a sense of finishedness. The floors were just cement, very basic local materials, and you get a kind of layering of space. And then you get the pool, which is bracketed so that it's not, it's hedonism really, and not to put it in the garden, which is what most people do, because there again is a polarity. You have people from the locality working and tending your field and tending your garden, and you're frolicking in the pool. So how does one actually create these balances and create new typologies as a result, where it's a courtyard pool now? It frames nature and it brackets the green, but it creates the opulence, makes the opulence very discreet, so that for the locals, it doesn't seem, like a pool out of some other 5-star hotel. And then, of course, the spaces which retract, the blinds can go down, you can create privacy, or the spaces can become one, the relationship with the outside, and the kind of transparency and the scale connecting the inside and outside, but yet being very discreet. This next project is a complicated one, which I think also Gaurav alluded to. I was an alum at CEPT, and I was asked a few years ago to design a building for them as the campus was expanding. And it was going to be the first building that was not going to be a building designed by Doshi. And so it was a very scary proposition. I had studied here. These buildings for me are sacred. For me, it's contemporary heritage. And so it was probably the most difficult project of my life for many reasons, which I will share. And so we were given a master plan where the library's position had been determined. Christopher Benninger did the master plan. This is an existing visual arts center. These are all designed by Doshi. And what we did was we intervened by adding a library. We added a cafeteria and a student center. And what we did was we unified it through the plaza, which was always an incomplete project. But talking about the users now, there was a building committee, and the building committee was comprised of architects who had all been my seniors at CEPT. So I mean, the memories of being ragged by them when you entered were already in my mind, and then to go into meetings to present the project was a very scary proposition. There were the patron clients, which is the Ahmedabad Education Society, and then there were the faculty and the students that one had to deal with, and having been a student there. So it was many public presentations, it was many discussions with faculty, which was a very tedious but a very, very fulfilling project, because this was really our most difficult assignment. And the brief that we had were given, and the footprint that we were given would have required a 6-story building. And for me, this was a no-no. And we did something very difficult, which is we said, how would you intervene in a heritage zone? And therefore, the datums, the heights, the massing, all that becomes very important. But what we came up with was a building that, instead of going 6 floors above the ground, would go 3 floors below the ground, so that it would match the datum of everything that was around it. Furthermore, what we designed was a building which was a series of 3 buildings, which allowed the object to do different things. The outer building was a skin, which had a logic with 4.5 meter sectional heights. And it was a performative skin, which responded to the scale of the buildings by Doshi that were already on the campus. Tried to pick up on the texture of some of these buildings without actually doing a literal copy of brick and exposed concrete, but tried to respond to those buildings more texturally. But it was a building that regulated the climate. The next building within it was a building which was all of dry construction, gypsum board, frames and steel, which was a building that really housed the library. And within the library, you had reading rooms and you had stacks. And the stacks was a building within a building, which had a logic of 2.4 meter heights, because that's what 8 feet to reach a book. The second building had a logic of 3.5 meter heights. So each building within the building had a completely different sectional logic. Now, what that did was 2 things. One is it separated these buildings completely. But what it also did was it created a slippage in section, which allowed visual connections that were on the diagonal and very extended. Because otherwise, if you have 6 stories of 3 going into a basement, you get a sandwich and you feel very claustrophobic. And this allowed us to carve courtyards, which went down 4.4 meters into the ground. You had the inner building, and from any part of any building, you could actually see a natural light, at least in most parts. And above the ground, it was a much quieter building, which related to the textures, to the datum. So the concrete buildings, you see the base of Doshi's buildings and concrete. So the base actually picked up on the width of the beam. It extended the beam to make a channel. It created a thickened beam to create, thickened base to create a kind of resonance with the buildings by Doshi. And then it created the texture through plywood here with with a finish, which gives it a kind of warmth. But it kind of begins to speak to the brick in a different way without actually copying it. And then you get this kind of transparency, because these louvers can be adjusted in many ways depending on the climate. And so this was really the performative facade of the building. And then the plinth tied up all these datums in a way that you had ramps and steps that created a base for these buildings. And then you created these sort of transitions so that the building outer skin related to the outer buildings, the inner skin related to the functions within. And then you got these courtyards that were carved in to bring light right through the building. And as and when we lined it up in complete axis with Doshi's existing building, so the library and the main entrance to the School of Architecture also spoke to each other. And then you began to get these sort of layers as you went through the building. And when you went down into the basement, the concrete color changed and became more white, so you got more light. And then you see the building within a building, which is the stacks, which are also built in plywood, because that was the most economic way to do it, and someday someone can convert it to wood or other materials. So many of these are designed consciously with limited life cycles, allowing for renovation in the future, whereas the outer building is designed, to create the frame is designed in concrete, keeping a larger lifespan in place. And here you see the kind of spaces within. And you have courtyards where you can step out to talk so you don't disturb people in the library. And this is how you see through the library on the diagonal, because the sectional logic of each building is quite different. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side is the lowest level where you have the quietest reading. And you see the lowest level where people are sitting down there. But from the level before that, you can see the natural light in the courtyards and the actual light above. And so you get these sort of readings. The structure at the lower levels is just 3 portals which support the building, and the corners become quiet rooms. So there are no beams and columns, and all the infrastructures, except for a Wi-Fi router, everything else is integrated within the stacks. That is the ducting, etc. It's designed for air conditioning, but it keeps cool because it's situated within the ground, and therefore the air conditioning is used minimally. And the base is all this raw concrete, which yet draws light within it. And as you go above, it's full of light. There are reading rooms. Depending on the season, there are places you can sit out and put a table to have a discussion without disturbing the library. And at night, it begins to create another kind of transparency. The base of the building is designed to be occupied. It has a thickness where people can sit and work and chat, and people have lunch. It's a kind of social space which embraces the students. And of course, with changing light, what you see within the building and the base changes dramatically from becoming more transparent to more opaque. This next project is in a city of Hyderabad, which is again also a hot, dry climate. This is a corporation where that relationship, I'm sorry, before Hyderabad, we're going to look at a project in Coimbatore. The map got left out, I'm sorry. And where these are 2 or 3 buildings I'm going to show you, which are corporate buildings. And the reason I'm showing you institutional buildings and corporate buildings is this is the mainstream. I don't want to spend time on houses or even galleries, but I mean, I think the mainstream is what we have to aim at changing as architects. And that was the wonderful thing, because the patronage was different for Mr. Kanvinde, Mr. Doshi, Mr. Correa, where they actually built institutional work, which is what I think where society really embraces architecture. And here in these corporate buildings, of course, the clients get differentiated, but even then they're somewhat synergistic. And this is a building in Coimbatore, which we did in 1994. This was 3 or 4 years into our practice. We got this project. These clients were very low key. They never allowed us to, or in a nice way, never asked us to publish it. So no one knew about it. So we continued doing small houses and interiors while this one big building got done on the side. And it's interesting to revisit now. It was designed in Coimbatore, which was all very low-rise industrial, but we had anticipated that this was going to change as the city grew. And so we decided to do a very introverted building around 3 courtyards. And the city did grow, and now you have high-rise buildings all around it, but this building yet works because the courtyards have all the privacy that this corporation needs. The clients were very keen that we had, at that point, this was 1994, where India was just liberalizing its economy, and the clients were very keen that we did a high-rise building. And, then they had a person who was going to give them curtain glazing. We really fought hard. We were very young as a practice, but we convinced them to do a building around courtyards. That is, just make this building lie down and it'll be better. And so we came up with this building, which was around 3 courtyards, using water to cool the building, because this is in the rain shadow, so it's hot and dry. But yet it kind of creates the presence of a corporate building. Glass is used very carefully in shade so that it doesn't sort of gain heat. And then there's a series of courtyards that you come into. This is the entrance courtyards. There's 7 companies within this corporation, so they all have their own identity. And so you see, they have their own staircases, their own entrances, but they get unified into one corporate identity with a large Manglo tile roof, which holds it all together. That was part of our project, because at India liberalizing in the early 90s, everyone wanted to do glass buildings because Singapore was doing that, Shanghai was doing that. Global capital was to be expressed like that, the architecture of impatient capital. But here, I think we managed to work with the client and to bring their aspirations to bear with something we felt which was more traditional, but yet had a kind of modernity which would serve their identity and their culture even better. And so it's a series of courtyards that you go through with water that circulates, that cools the building, the noise and the sound of water. This is an installation by Rajiv Sethi. So the verandas and the circulation, the circulation is all verandas, it's no corridors. And there are installations there where people can meet and sit. And as you go into the building to where the owners of the building sits, it becomes the scale of a house. So it cuts the glare out. The roof always is like a brow. And it makes your eye go towards the water and the coolness, as we see in our traditional architecture. Padmanabhapuram, places like that were our inspiration here. And one of the interesting things here was the client said they had a budget for art and they wanted to do art. And we also realized that if you put painting on these walls, it would be a disaster, not architecturally, but also in terms of maintenance. So we again worked with them to get artists to work on building elements. And this was a fantastic project with Rajiv Sethi when he was much younger. You see him here, a young Rajiv Sethi. But we got Manjeet Bawa, we got Yogesh Rawal, we got many artists to work with us. Even the waterfall was designed by artists. Manjeet Bawa, here you see him working on site, translated his paintings into the railing for the bridge using and embossing his objects in copper. And then also Rajiv Sethi designed this fataka, or a flag, which was usually in fabric, and it's got 104 Lakshmis in it, 108, which are the sacred sort of number, because this company is called Lakshmi Machine Works. They do machine tools. We were inspired by the Mughal Jali, and we used scrap material with Yogesh Rawal to create a vocabulary of jalis for the building, because it's all naturally ventilated, the common spaces. So we went to their machine tool factories and we picked up all the scrap that comes out from the punching of the machines, machine tool making, fabrication, and they were developed into a vocabulary of jalis by Yogesh Rawal, who's a Bombay-based artist. And the jalis actually frame the building, but the jalis also remind them from where the wealth of the company comes, which is the material from which the machines are sort of made. And the scale of these jalis is also very variable. This next building is a corporate building in Hyderabad, which is in Cyberabad in the IT center. It was for a construction company called KMC, who used technologies to monitor their construction site. They're very high tech, and they wanted us to really do, they wanted global architecture, and they were showing us many buildings. This is Mercedes-Benz showroom. You see the logo on the glass door. And I realized that all these buildings had fishing nets, because the Telangana, Andhra Pradesh debate was going on and riots were happening all the time. People were stoning these glass buildings. And so it made me think that global capital, the images that go with globalization, so compulsive, so crazy, that we blindly do this. At that moment, we were working in Jaipur, and this little water cooler, which which a business association with the government put up in Jaipur in the summer, many of you might have seen it. There are about 200 of these that are constructed all over the city. Jaipur becomes 50 degrees centigrade, as you know, and this is just to supply water. It's a thatch hut which has matkas inside. So the hut also with evaporative cooling keeps cool. The matkas keep the water cool. And it's a very humane gesture, because this guy who works for this association, he comes and he mans the water cooler. He comes in the morning for work. He comes into the little building and he's ready for business. He has his beautiful brass kettle by which he gives water to people. There are no plastic cups involved. It's very sustainable. You cup your hand, you wash it a little bit, you drink the water, you smile at him, thank him. It's such a humane gesture. And he comes once in a while and keeps the hut wet. So through evaporative cooling, he's comfortable in the hut. And then within the hut, the water is in matkas. Through through evaporative cooling, the matkas keep cool. And it's just such a sustainable, such a beautiful, such a low-tech operation with immense beauty and humanity. And for us, this one object was so inspirational that, as you can see, we made videos, we documented temperature. We were just so fascinated that when we were doing the building in Hyderabad, we decided that we should actually be inspired by this. So how can we be inspired by this building rather than the more formal precedents of architecture became a really important challenge for us. And we came up with a corporate office, which is a 5-floor high garden, but it's not a green wall in the way you stick matkas on the wall and, as we have in all our various airports. But this is a performative screen, which is green, which has a misting system, which keeps the green cool. So the air that goes through the facade actually cools the building. We handmade that facade using recycled alloys of aluminium. We made this all in a very small factory with one of our local contractors outside Hyderabad. So it allowed his business to flourish instead of going to a big multinational to do this. It also gave us a very lovely handmade finished texture because it was all very impure alloys, but that's what we wanted. And it was sort of handcrafted. It was a new material, which is metals, which we assume will be mechanically fabricated, but it was handcrafted and done in very slow steps. And so while this was impatient capital calling, which means the clients wanted the buildings to do business, we convinced them to give us 2-3 more years to grow the facade. So while we finished the building, they occupied it. We designed every facade with different plants. We did experiments in the nursery to see what species would grow. This is how the framework of the facade looks with the plants. That's the facade that's sort of ready, and then how it grows and you have to cut it back, etc. That we took our own time doing while they occupied the building because it was a separate operation. And here you see the misting that keeps the facade cool. The plants grow through a hydroponic tray. They don't grow through the misting. The misting is only for atmosphere. The misting is to cool the building, to clean the plants, and it's very minimal water because it's really misted water. But sectionally also, it's a building that allows hot air to escape. It has spaces that are interesting, spaces that respond to the program. The sandwich, the cheese you see in the sandwich in the middle is the tendering department because that needed privacy. But all other parts of the buildings have double heights and they have spaces where people can socialize and communicate. That's what the building looks like when it begins to blossom and bloom. And it's like these upper and lower courtyards. So it's these sort of connectivities which also create social space. The building you see in the left corner got a LEED certificate. We couldn't get a LEED certificate because we hadn't sealed our windows. Now with Greha and other more localized and contextualized credit systems and certifications, of course, it's a different matter. But this is really the tyranny of the green industry, which makes a problem and then seduces you with chemical and mechanical fixes to fix the problem. And so I think that's something also we have to challenge, because I think some low-tech innovative solutions can also create beautiful buildings. And here it is really the shadow that becomes the ornament. And I come back to this image that I started off with. See, that is the catwalk, which has the hydroponic trays from where the plants grow. The misting has nothing to do with the growing of the plants. But what is interesting is this dissipates a kind of binary that exists in our corporations, which is, the poorest class in the corporation, in this case, it's the gardeners, would have nothing to do with the bosses because there would be no space, they would come together. But here, the poorest, which is the gardeners, actually the company depends on their identity, for their identity depends on the gardeners. Because if the facade of the building doesn't look good, the identity of the building dissipates. And Sanjay Prakash, who you all know, is a good friend and who studied this building with me, and he made many observations which I had actually arrived at intuitively. And he said, you've really created green jobs because the identity and the green facade depends on these gardeners. And what you've allowed is the lowest in this corporation to surface on the highest. So he calls them green jobs. And so, there is a great awareness. If you go to their blog, KMC, there's stories about how the gardeners have helped someone with a boutique or a bouquet of flowers, how they've captured a butterfly for some someone's child, the friendships that have developed as a result of how the building operates is quite interesting. And so, you know, I mean, even this image, actually an intern from our office took it. It's not a photographer who was professional. And so these are things that one did intuitively, but in thinking about them in retrospect, I think we have to learn, because that's how, as a community, we will grow in the way we work together in terms of creating these feedback loops. And so therefore, even this image is not a staged image. If it was a staged image, I would have removed the wires and the newspaper. But the synergy between people working on the facade and people in the office who are completely different kinds of jobs is great. So it's these gardeners who are the heroes of this building, and that's how the building sits in its context. That's a municipal garden in front of the building, which the clients actually sponsored now. And so you almost feel visually the building growing out of the garden. The question then becomes, how do these ideas of the context and its context also move beyond where we work and the context that we know very well? And I'm going to share with you a project which I haven't shown very much, not many people in India even know about, but it's a project for Novartis in their campus in Basel in Switzerland, where they were very interested in architecture. They got someone like Vittorio Lumpagnani, who is a very well-known urban designer in Italy, to do a master plan. It's a very conservative master plan. You know, they invited architects from all around the world. We were on a short list with other architects in India. We were very honored to have been selected to do the building. So we represent India on this campus, and there are about 20 countries represented. And it's a very conservative site plan, as you can see. And they had one triangular site, so they didn't know how to deal with that. So I think the best way they could deal with it is they gave it to Frank Gehry. So that's the building by Frank Gehry, which you see twisted on the triangular sites. And these are buildings. Our site is here. Mr. Maki from Japan has done that building, and the buildings around are by Herzog de Meuron. There are buildings that are by different architects, Rafael Moneo. There are many other architects that are sort of involved in the campus. So for us, it was a big honor, because it was also, in a sense, about representing India. So these are the list of architects: Tado Ando, Chipperfield, many others who have built there. And that's our building just when it was being finished. And now, of course, the other buildings have come up, but this is Mr. Maki's building here. And the garden has been all, of course, developed. This is all lush and green now. And so this was a very early image of the campus. And so that was a concept we came up with, which is what you see as a green space, and I'll come to it. This was a lab. It was a lab for the future. These are all lab buildings. And what was interesting is everyone is given the lab floor plate. And then you're given this diagram where you have large aggregated cores. And I'm happy to say that we really challenged that. Maybe it's coming in working in India, where you're always trying to find loopholes in the bylaws. I don't know what it is. But for me, I think it was very problematic. And I must say that the building was very educative as a process, because it also made me think about the Western and the Eastern paradigms as being very different. The West has got very trapped in facade architecture, in wrappers. You know, because I suppose legislation and the technologies have become so advanced. So everyone was given a core like this. And what they did was they put the labs in the center and they put the offices on the side. So the offices got all the views and the labs got nothing, and they were working between cores. We challenged them, and we challenged them to disaggregate the cores. We said, break these cores into making 3 circulations, which is more efficient, making the ducts for the labs at the back. That way the labs can go there. This put the project back by 3 months, but they finally accepted it, all the various consultants. And I think they're very happy with it, at least from the feedback that I get. The second thing that we challenged was that everyone did 4.5 meter heights, which is the ideal height for a lab with a false ceiling and the ducts and things. And we challenged that too. And we said, look, for the labs, you need 4.5 meters, but for the offices, we can manage in 8 feet, which means we'll save a lot of area, and let's carve that area out into a courtyard so that everyone has some aspect of the building they can enjoy. And this also was very controversial, because they hadn't done it in any of the other buildings, but they agreed to do it in our building. And so what we came up was with a diagram like that, where you had a ground floor which brought you to the Rhine River, which is where the building sits on the Rhine River. the labs with their ducts, which you see in red here, with a green facade where the scientists from the lab can go out to write up all their stuff. They have a relief from the lab because they can't come out into the building because of sanitary reasons, hygiene, but also that they can't carry particles in and things. So that way they have a lovely space. Visually, they look at the courtyard. The offices look at the Rhine, but the offices also look at the courtyard. But because of the slippage in section, which is again the same principle we carried out at CEPT, you get diagonal views, which means from every lab, you actually visually can wave out to many more people in different offices. So it becomes a social space. And then the cafeteria and the social spaces on the top from the terrace where you get a view of the Rhine. And the garden in the center was developed with in collaboration with Gunther Woh, who's a Swiss landscape architect. And it was also meant to cool and warm the building. The facade is a register. It has 28 species. So at different weeks and different months, different things bloom and blossom. And through that, and the ducts become like these trunks for the tree, and that becomes the kind of image of the building. On the side of the Rhine, you have these two double heights. These all have automated blinds. So right now, because it was the evening, the blinds had all gone up, but otherwise the blinds are at different levels. So it's a building in completely different textures. It's an exposed concrete, but we went to the Basel quarries and we took the stone from the Basel quarries, which is a very particular ochre stone, and we mixed it in the concrete. And then the one facade is with hydroponic trays. It's also green. It's across the road from Marquis building, which is actually uses a very beautiful white glass, but texturally they are very different. And here on the facade, you can see the blinds. And in plan, it's a very fluid space. The labs are visible as you walk into the building, so you get glimpses of the work without disturbing them. The staircases take you to the top. When you come to the upper floor, you have the conference areas and things for the labs, but you have the labs, you have the green garden, and you have the office. The office literally sits in the garden. There is no line between, there's no glass. You can, you touch the leaves as you walk through there. The people from the labs can come out and sit in the garden. You see the labs in action. The garden has staircases that take you to these half levels, so you don't climb more than a flight. You have tables in the garden, so you can lose yourself in the forest and work there. Conferences happen. There's a flat screen. People set up a conference and a meeting in the middle of the garden. And the garden, of course, not only is it healthy, but it also creates a greenhouse effect. So in the winter, it's cool. The garden also becomes a filter. There you see the Rhine River, which you see the water of the Rhine, which is a very beautiful river. In conjunction, you see these half heights that take you through it. So the building is a very social building because it's very porous. People have chance encounters. It's not an isolation of the scientists in the lab and the office workers. There's visual connection. There are chance encounters because the circulation is complex and it's segregated sectionally in many ways. The building is very transparent. Actually, what you see out here are decks where meeting rooms are. The meeting rooms are open in the courtyard in these decks, so people can come out and speak and talk to each other. And then in the background, you see the building by Herzog de Meuron. This is the facade with the many species, and that's why you see the kind of richness on it. I will end with this last project, which is the project that Gaurav talked about, where now the users get very differentiated. And this is a low-income housing for mahouts and elephants in Jaipur. Elephants being in Jaipur is a mistake because it's an accident of history and tourism. This is from the New York Times, where American tourists could go for a few days and feel like Maharajas. The elephants came through the Maharajas for battle, for pomp, for ceremony. But these are tropical beings and not supposed to be in the desert. They take tourists up and down the Amber Fort. Their faces get painted with toxic paints. They don't have water to clean it. It was a competition which we won. It was an invited competition, so it wasn't very publicized. This happened in, I think now, 2006. And so that was a site we were given, and the site had already been quarried by sand contractors. The housing that the elephants were living in, which had been made by the government, is what you see below. The elephants were supposed to live there, the mahouts on top, but the mahouts all came and started living down because the proximity of the mahout to the elephant is very critical. We made it a project about landscape. We studied water. We looked at why, looking at the context of the context, so to speak, and understanding why elephants were even where they were, and what it meant. And really, then the central protagonist for us became water, and how we would actually collect water, hold it, raise the water table in whatever way, and architecture was secondary. That was a very difficult decision, but we made it really a landscape project about trying to create micro systems, micro dams. How would you actually hold the water? What are the species you would plant? That is a site that we studied with Google Earth. We could see the streams, we could see what had been excavated. So we came up with a site plan where the landscape was designed first, and really in the interstitial spaces, the housing went. And so essentially it was housing which was around courtyards, organized around larger courtyards with many water bodies, of which only I think 2 have been built right now. And then some visitor facilities at the entrance. And so that really was the site plan. Finally, we worked with Mohan Rao, who is a landscape architect from Bangalore. And that was the transformation, where from 2007 to 2017, in 10 years, just because that hill is the same hill that you see here. Essentially, what we did was we excavated and created water bodies. Landscape wasn't even in the tender. It wasn't even a PWD item, but we had to really push hard for it. Then the government fell, so the project got abandoned. Of course, the PWD built all the buildings first, because that's where all the billing happens, and you know what I mean by that. The landscape was just left like that. The project got abandoned for 3 years, which was very good. It was very frustrating for us at that time, but in retrospect, it was a blessing, because the landscape regenerated itself. So in 3 years, you suddenly got a very beautiful landscape just because the water had been caught there. And now, of course, things have blossomed. And of course, even for the housing, it's not like we didn't pay attention. We created, we expanded the 250 square foot brief into a bigger house by adding a courtyard, by organizing 3 houses around a bigger courtyard. They became mansions. If those 3 families got on well together, it was great. If they didn't get on well, at least they had their own courtyard and their terrace. And so basically, to break away from the row housing paradigm, which is what the brief had called for, we kind of used open to sky spaces and disaggregated it in a way that we could also then store the food using this sort of light metal structure, which would create insulation also for the elephant and ventilation for the room of the elephant. And that's how, when it got built, you can see Amber in the background there, the first water body got built. And we created these openings so the Mahout's children could also interact while they were safe. The elephant became part of the life in the community, etc. And these were very raw buildings built in basic local materials, as you can see. And of course, we didn't plaster or paint it because we didn't even have the budget to do that. But we hope that when they will be allocated, when I took this image, this was 5 years ago, the buildings hadn't yet been allocated. Now they're getting allocated to the different families. So it's really a low-income housing kind of project. And different people deal with their clusters differently. Here's a Mahout coming home from work. Some clusters now, it's interesting. This is a reversal. So in the same way as in the KMC building, there was a sudden reversal that the lowest paid people in that corporation actually began to become equal with all the IT kids in the building. Suddenly here, what is interesting is because of the water, the poorest in Jaipur, which are people who earn 5,000-6,000 rupees a month, or sometimes just with tips a little more, have more water than they need, so they can actually have a lawn. The middle class in Jaipur are buying tankers of water so that they can water their lawns, whereas these guys can have lawns and they're the poorest. So the aspiration of the middle class suddenly becomes accessible to the poorest people in that society. So that's one reading you can make for us. So which is just to say that architecture can become a very critical instrument in actually correcting these reversals. And I just want to pause here to, or maybe I'll pause in the next slide. And this is just when life begins to take over. Here you see how, some of these clusters have lawns and people here get along. Now these houses will all be plastered and painted. And once that is done, of course, it'll take its own life in terms of its beauty. Now here you have a before and after picture from the same spot, but I'm going to just take a minute and read something from Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who used to be the chancellor at Ashoka University, a really well-respected intellectual, someone who I admire. And Pratap Bhanu Mehta, in an issue he did for Caravan magazine on equity, and I'm just using this quote because it's something that's challenging for all of us. He says, in a society riven by deep inequity, there is not even the minimal basis for mutual concern, where social distance makes human beings almost a different species in each other's eye. Why would we expect anything else? Why would a contractor care if one of his construction workers used his hands rather than a brush to apply a dangerous chemical? The more inequality there is, the harder it is to imagine what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. It has to be admitted that even the most well-meaning and sensitive find it hard to imagine what the suffocation, the darkness, and the sheer physical suffering of being at the bottom of a social hierarchy might be really like. The very thing you would expect to instigate the questions of justice makes it hard to even raise them. And I think this is a very important quote from Pratap Bhanu Mehta, and a provocation for all of us as architects, is that clearly there's a detachment. We work from very privileged positions. Can we really understand the suffering or the inequities that we try to address? That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to address them, because there is really no moral value in not acting. But we have to be sensitive that we understand them in ways we can create these reversals. But I think the more important thing is for us to understand and become mindful of the fact that actually architecture, urban planning, urban design, landscape architecture, design more broadly, is very instrumental in the way it can dissipate these binaries that we can otherwise unknowingly perpetuate in society. And I think that is very important, of how even for the lowest incomes we can make these transformations in their environment. And just coming back to water as the central protagonist, these are unintended consequences. Here you see how bad the health of those elephants are. Now they have the water. What we didn't realize was that, and this is an image in the summer when the water is the lowest, of course it raises the water table. But what we didn't realize, and we had accidentally done, was also by providing water, the bonding between the mahout and the elephant actually gets transformed, because the closeness that they obtain through the process of bathing is what we had not even planned for. So architecture has sometimes unintended consequences. I think it's very important for us as a profession to capture these, for us as a profession to share these, for us as a profession to build on these, because I think that's what would really put us in a better position in society. The mahouts, this wasn't in the brief, the mahouts asked us to make pavilions. They made us aware of the fact that elephants are very social beings, and if they're isolated for too long, they go rogue. So they need to meet their buddies and hang out together. So with leftover pipes and with thatch and bamboo, we made these pavilions for them. What we didn't realize was these pavilions were also an opportunity, because the children of the mahout, who are now conversant with social media, they started a company called Elephantastic, and they started charging tourists 200 rupees to feed the elephants, 500 rupees to have a bath with the elephant, and it became a part of their economy. Again, an unintended consequence. Really, I think in retrospect, what we did by putting value on the water, by putting value on the interrelationships between human beings and animals in this case, and being open to listening to the mahouts and getting feedback loops, them connected as part of the feedback loops, I think what we landed up doing was creating an armature for life. And once you do that, it really makes even the role of architecture quite different. We also convinced the government in this case to create a guest house, a very low-key guest house, which would allow scholars, conservationists, maybe architects to go at a low price to live there. It's really 4 rooms with khatiyas around a courtyard. So it's very, very stark and very minimal, and an observation veranda from where people could also partake in the life of what was happening there. Coming back to users as patrons and operational users and actually, the users on the site, in this case, mahouts and elephants. The patron here is the government. And so what you see in orange is the BJP government. Then the government falls, the project stops, the Congress government takes over, a little bit happens, the BJP comes back, and then it finally finishes. Now the Congress has taken over, and so it stopped. So every government does exactly what the other government was doing, as we know in our very robust democracy. And here, what you see in red is us, which are the architects. You see the agency, so the government changes. You see the agencies changing. It starts with the Amber Development Authority, it moves to the CPWD, it goes to the Tourism Department, it goes to the Forestry Department, then no one is in charge of it, then finally the Forestry or the Animal Rights Department, some other department comes. So the operational client keeps changing. The users, which is the mahouts and the elephants, and we were the only constant. And this is a mapping we have done because we think it's very interesting, our correspondence, how we dealt with it. But I also realized through this complicated project what an architect can do in connecting these disparate constituencies. And I think that is also a very integral part of our role. Because what we have to finally do is, when the patron client, the operational client, and the user client gets dissipated and separated and have different aspirations, it is our job really in a way to weave them together through the kind of spatial possibilities that we present to them, that their aspirations can find similar solutions. And for me, this project is really a story in that whole experience of weaving these aspirations together. Now, this is more recently, they're building many more of these pavilions with troughs so the elephants can hang out together. Look at how the trees have grown. We added a darwaza with a little information booth. Now, again, this has been closed because now, I don't know, it'll happen. It'll have its own life. But this is how all these projects are. This is our toolkit for all the infrastructure and the site plan. That's how we imagined it, to have a sense of wetness with many micro dams. This is a Photoshop image of our aspiration. And I was very happy a few months ago that one of the mahouts on WhatsApp sent me an image of what it looked like in August, September this year, where the water bodies had been full and life was, in a sense, thriving in whatever form it was taking. And this was really the intent of the project. And this is the lowest parts of the site where water drains automatically, and it's almost become like a forest. So I just want to sort of end by thanking you all, thanking you for this incredible honor to do the first AP Kanvinde lecture. Thank you, Sanjay, for all your kind words, and Gaurav for everything you've done, Professor Chani and Professor Chaturvedi for having introduced things, and really having had this occasion to celebrate the work of AP Kanvinde. For me, I think in my own work now, when I think about it, and it's really this lecture that has made me think about it, is those questions about Batley that I took to him, and his directing me to look at Gropius more seriously, I hope will find a good synthesis in my own work as I go forward. And so it has really been an honor. And I just would end by, challenging the younger generation to think more seriously about our role in society, about how we can provide society these spatial possibilities. And I want to end with this quote from a Polish chess grandmaster, which is, tactics is what we always engage with, but that's knowing what to do when there's something to do. I think we really need to look at strategy more seriously, because then we'll create new possibilities. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening to me. Thanks.
I really don't know what to say after such a phenomenal set of visuals, slides, projects, inspirations, and words that I've been flowing through. I'm really choked in terms of thoughts, questions, and a mindless moment that comes. Between the ants and the elephants lies the animal, which is the human animal, right? So I would first now give the honor. I know sir would have a very less time for the audience, and because he has to rush to the class, but I would still wish if he can take one or two few questions.
No, I have a good 10 or 12 minutes, so that's enough time to answer many questions.
Great. So that would be really nice. So maybe I first request architect Sanjay Kanvinde to share his thoughts on it.
Well, I've heard Rahul often and number of occasions, but it's always enjoyable to kind of listen to his takes on this whole thing. And I especially enjoy, the kind of social angle that he brings into the projects. I think that is really admirable. But it's a little unfortunate that I don't see a very large audience here. I wish there were many more students who could have attended this and taken advantage of this wonderful occasion.
Actually, it's parallelly live on YouTube as well.
Okay, okay.
And, some people would not be able to join through this, so the connect was also given through YouTube Live.
Okay.
And also, this is a recorded archive now, which would be available as and when we would want to get back to this also, sir.
Yeah. The other thing is, of course, the choice of the next speaker is going to be a tall order, filling Rahul's shoes. We'll come to that later. Thank you, Rahul.
No, thanks, Sanjay. Thanks again, and really, it was nice to see you, but also nice to hear your brief but very sharp introduction.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sanjay sir. May I request Professor Chani?
All I can say is that I'm really grateful Rahul Mirotra could join with us today. It's rare to find a teaching architect. You find architects, you find teachers, but you find rarely people who are able to teach architecture, the architecture that they have themselves developed, they have themselves built. We've all been fascinated when we have dealt with his works in the classroom, but to hear it from the man himself and the intricacies of his work, it was simply amazing. And the most important thing I find, I mean, it was that kind of thought was there even when I used to look at his work in the classroom, is the fact that how concerned Rahul is about the people he's designing the building for. He is very concerned whether he's designing the building for somebody in the first world, or he's designing the building for the mahouts, for the elephants, and in extension for the mahouts. The way he deals with that, I commend him for that. I'm not flattering him at all. I'm not at all flattering him. I'm simply saying it shows how conscious and concerned he is at delivering these spaces which actually make a real difference on ground. And I'll end by my statement by saying the last project is really a kind of a summer of all that his work really stands for. You know, the Hathi Gaon is not having the kind of money that probably he would have had for a project in Basel or projects in Europe, but that is the kind of project that exhibits what he really stands for as a teaching architect. Amazed, really, really highly appreciated, commendable, amazing work. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Professor Chani. You know, I just will pick up on that a little bit. Thank you for picking up on the thread that you picked up on. And the couple of things I'd like to say is that, actually in my own trajectory is unusual in that I hadn't taught for a day in my life till 2000, 2003, when I actually started teaching here in the US. In India, one was doing things like the Urban Design Research Institute, writing and doing this kind of work, which was like on the fringes of the academy, but not teaching. So it was actually after about 10 or 15 years of practice that one went into teaching. And, I feel very blessed for that, because the teaching and the challenge to communicate those experiences to students was actually very enriching in ways. I mean, I could not even talk about my work the way I'm talking about it, like say in 2000, before I started teaching, because teaching actually for all of us is a blessing because it becomes a mode of self-reflection too. And I think, we benefit from it as much as our students benefit from it. And I think that is very important for us to note. And the other thing that I'd like to kind of just say is, I could present the project on Hathigao as a project just full of failures and disasters. I just extracted very quickly in 5 minutes the essence of it. I've often provoked many of my colleagues in the academy that we should organize an international seminar on failure, where architects, come and just present all the projects that they've done which have failed. This would be a very important demystification process for the students. Architects we all do that. We select the best 10 images of our projects and we show them. And as a student, I remember listening to architect, I was intimidated. My God, how would you ever achieve this kind of thing, right? And so I think we should think seriously about organizing a conference on failure where we take projects which we otherwise celebrate, but also talk about what doesn't work in them. And I think it'll be a very therapeutic thing for all of us as architects also, but it'll be good for students.
Thank you, Rahul, for
Thank you
that
so much.
insight. May I request Shubhajit, my colleague, to take up a question from the audience?
Yeah, thank you, sir, for this opportunity, and also I thank.
You're very soft. You should speak into the mic, please.
Shubhajit, you're not audible.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, better. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for this nice explanation and so beautiful way you present it. So there are a couple of questions that are in the chat box. So I just take a question from Divyanshi, and her question is context the concept? What is your definition of architecture? So, sir, can you answer this?
So the question is the context, the concept? No, I think it's the understanding of the context in its most nuanced terms that gives you the concept, right? That's what nourishes the concept. The concept for your response to the context emerges from your understanding of the context. If you don't understand the context, the more nuanced your understanding of the context, the nourishment towards that concept for the solutions that you're going to engage with would be that much richer, right? So I think it's the context is what nourishes the concept. The concept is not the context necessarily, but it's what nourishes it. And that understanding of the context is what's critical. And I think we have to spend more time nuancing that understanding of the context, even if sometimes it's undoable challenges. But to have your aspirations high actually enriches it, because a lot of it also is things that subconsciously, architecture and design is such an intuitive process. Also, we rationalize it, but partly it's intuitive. I mean, my own personal argument, people often say that architects always work very late at night. They're working till the last minute. Students are working, doing all-nighters. And, the reason in my mind for that is very simple. At every decision you come to, and this is where the understanding and the nuances of the context are very important. Every decision, and that's what design is about, every decision has about 1,000 possible solutions, right? So through the semester, you spend your time indulging in the luxury of trying different solutions. That's what sketching is about and things like that, right? And then what happens is, as you come closer and closer to your deadline, you're making huge intuitive leaps to close those doors to thin the number of solutions, right? And that's why just the night before your submission, you're even making bigger intuitive leaps and you're closing even more doors so that you can find one solution, right? And so that, I think, process, if we have to rationalize it somewhat, you can't 100% rationalize it. I think our understanding of the context allows us a benchmark across which we can make those choices in terms of the solutions we are making. And so that's where the concept, I think, emerges from an understanding of the context. And we have to find more complicated, more nuanced, more rich ways of actually explaining and understanding the context.
Yes,
Maybe
sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. And sir, this is also a question of mine because, like, as a student, the first day, like, I was asked that, what do you understand by architecture? So I had some definition, and then when I started teaching, then I asked my student the same question. So they have different opinion, and through different years, that definition changes. So, sir, with the same line, sir, I just also take the second part of the questions, that what is your definition of architecture?
Well, you know, actually, I'm saying this jokingly, so don't misunderstand me. This is like this is a trick question, because you can fall whichever way you answer it, right? So look, I mean, I think for me, that's why I keep using the word spatial possibilities. Actually, right now, currently, given my current thinking, I don't want to say given the stage of my career and things like that. When given my current thinking, I see architecture at a very fundamental level, which is to see spatial possibilities and how they can be manifest. Now, whether they get manifest through brick and mortar, they get manifest through steel and grass, or they get manifest through bamboo and cloth, I think we have to be open to. Architecture is too, and that's why the book that I've just done is called Does Permanence Matter? And it's a provocation that we are fixated on permanence, and permanence is our default condition, right? So why, like, imagine in the third year in your program at Roorkee, if you gave students a problem, which was to design a weekend house for a family whose kids were 5 and 6 years old, and that this house was supposed to last only for 15 years. When those kids are 21, they're never going to come with their parents for a weekend again, right? What would your design of the house mean? Would you design it with life cycles of materials that last 200 years, and your assumption is that that family will sell it to another family, will sell it to a third family, will sell it to a fourth family? Or could your assumption be that that whole house gets knocked down in 20 years and all those materials get absorbed in the building construction ecology of the hinterland, right? For me, that's why the Kumbh Mela was such a fascinating study to do, because it was a ephemeral megacity where a whole megacity gets dismantled and that material gets absorbed in the geography of the hinterland, right? So that is a whole different imagination of architecture. So I think architecture is about us dwelling or habiting space, and the spatial possibilities that that offers, and how that gets manifest in material. And I'm leaving that very open. At least that's my current thinking. So I don't know if that helps you or not.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the answer. May I request Megha, my scholar, to take the next question?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Rahul, for such a wonderful presentation. I will read the next question. By Naman. In today's context, in the wake of dwindling per capita natural resources, how do you see circular economy principles getting incorporated in and subsequently disseminated via the architectural education?
So I think that's a very good question. And again, these are questions that, there are people who have expertise to answer in more nuanced ways. But for me, I think in a more provocative way, I'll say this, that I think the one thing we have to urgently do in architectural education is introduce what time means, and the notion of time. And I say this in the broadest way, but also in a very specific way. The notion of time in terms of how we are building, for how long we are building, and therefore the choices of what we are building with. As I also provocatively argue, that are we designing permanent solutions for temporary problems? And often we are doing that. I mean, I use the example of shopping malls. Shopping malls in America. There are 3,000 shopping malls that have been abandoned in America. These are 3,000. Shopping malls means huge, like 25 acres of land with parking lots and big buildings, and They just lie abandoned. Olympic stadiums lie abandoned all over the world. Many things like that lie abandoned because those were all permanent solutions. And permanent is a relative term, because permanent, I mean long life cycles of materials of 30, 40, 50, 100 years, but for very temporary needs, you know. And so we take permanence as a default condition as human beings. And this is something J.B. Jackson, who is a American landscape commentator, had comment about it, that human beings were nomadic. They kind of occupied temporal landscapes. They moved, and as slowly over time we became settlers, right? When we settled, we began building larger settlements, which became cities, and cities became devices by which the surplus of the countryside was disseminated, and therefore markets became big. Then we made the cities more permanent. We had the city beautiful movement. And then as a result of that, we separated the rich from the poor. We separated workspaces from living spaces. We made more permanent our situations, right? And we celebrated it through architecture and making it even more permanent, right? And now we are realizing with the pandemic, we're realizing with climate change, we're realizing with globalization that this is not such a stable entity as we have. And so really, and I think there's a question here about the pandemic and what it would mean, and openness and human contact. Absolutely, this is what it changes. Why are farmers markets in America become so popular? Because people have lost human contact. People have lost the fact that they could go into a shopping mall and negotiate with someone a bargain, right? That's human contact, right? And so now many of these ephemeral landscapes are coming back in our cities. In India, I mean, I think we have the fortune of having that, and we are trying to remake it in a permanent solution in the way imaginations of the government and planners is going right now, correct? So, I mean, I think the provocation here for all of us is that it's not about one or the other. It's not about swinging to capitalism and then swinging to communism and then swinging to socialism. It's about finding the spaces in between. That's what that Marty Chen quote was. It's about the coexistence of many of these things simultaneously, of spaces in a city which are about impermanence, spaces in a city which are about permanence, spaces in a city which are organized on a temporal scale, spaces in a city which are organized through architecture. It's the simultaneity of all of that together is the big design challenge for the future. You know, and I think that's where design comes in. And that's why I think it's very dangerous to make the binaries, because then you live in the binaries, right? You become an architect for the informal city, then you work only in slums and upgradation and things, and everyone else is evil, right? And if you work with the developers, then everyone else is like a waster, right? But the question is, what we have to do as planners and architects is make a world where all of that exists in harmony, in synergy, and in a kind of generosity, which is useful both ways, correct? I think that is the real challenge. And I think, I'm sorry, I'm running out of time because I have a class in 2 minutes, but many of the questions I see here, that what does the pandemic pose in design thinking, you know, whether it's materials that you're using, concrete and choices, I think it has to do with time. We have to look at what is the material life cycle of things, and what is the life cycle of what we are designing for. And that's what is also linked to what I was talking about, understanding the client, because the patron client sometimes, or the patron client has an aspiration that I want to leave a legacy and this building must last 600 years, right? The operational client is saving money because the poor chap has a budget which is very small, and so they're trying to make shortcuts to serve their own purpose. The users have other aspirations. The users say, give me one good big courtyard and a small room and that's enough. I don't need, you know, 2 big rooms, right? Those are all different aspirations which have an aspiration linked to time. So time is a dimension there, right? And I think so I think can play a big role. Maybe it's an arrogance of thinking about our importance, but I'm convinced, I'm committed to the fact that what we educate ourselves to do is to examine these more complex and nuanced spatial possibilities. And I think that would make for better environments. And understanding and being sensitive to climate, to time, to materiality, to resources is that sphere of concern. We must expand that, but then we must find ways that we can influence society also. And I think that's where there's a very big disjuncture right now for us in India.
Thank you so much, Rahul sir. I know in next 1 minute or so you would have the class, and I have the august duty to give the vote of thanks towards the end. Though I know there are a lot of unfinished questions, but with I would say I'm falling short of words to really thank both architect Rahul Mirotra for his amazing conversation and inspiration to all of us, which is going to continue in years to come as well, because this talk is going to be relooked multiple times, sir. And also must thank architect Sanjay Kanvinde, who very graciously and very gently, brought in the trigger, which actually connects the two dots, one from the Harvard of the 1940s and another from the Harvard of the 2020s. So I believe, connecting these two dots can actually be a line, which can be a bridge, and it can also be a circle, which can make the whole sphere of influence and concern bringing together. So I think you've put it so gently and so nicely. Really grateful to all of you. Grateful to our Honorable Director, IIT Roorkee, and my head of the department, Professor Chani, who were instrumental in making this entire series initiated, and we believe we should continue this further. And I would say, nonetheless, my colleagues and my fellow students and friends like Shubhajit, Megha, Divyang, Yash, who've been helping us round the clock at the back end and also now at the front end. This would not be possible because I think we believe we are technologically not the masters here, so at the mercy of the electrical pulse and the internet connectivity, this lecture has happened. Don't know ways to thank it, and also thank my media cell, Mr. Rohit and Sonika and the media team for all their support, and last but not the least, the audience who is yet to join and also see it again, and the audience across the world. I believe this is also the context that one statement which can unify the world between Harvard and India or US and India at the same time, where the sun is rising up and where the other sun has actually already set, is actually a very, very contextual response. And I really don't have words to thank all of you here who've joined us from all over. With all these thoughts and words, I really thank and draw this to the close of session. And we'll get back to you, sir, through emails for our gestures later. And we'll stay in contact with all of you back again, sir. Thank you so much, and
Thanks.
wishing you a
Thanks,
wonderful
Sanjay.
day
Thank you.
ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.